Well, I'm going to start here just wiping a bit of molybdenum paste in the inside of that and a bit on the face where it rubs against the back of the shutter case. Now I've positioned my blade, the settings ring, so that the holes are lined up with the holes in the fixed plate there, so I've got access to put the screws in. The lever only goes on one way up. This is the top of the shutter with the cutouts in it. This is the bottom of the shutter. The lever is at the bottom of the shutter, so I'm just rotating it until you can see the holes. Where the hell are we? Somewhere around here. There we go. I can see them now. I'll put that on that jig of mine so we can see things a bit easier. Right. So I can see the hole through there. So the shoulder screw needs to go in. I'll get one started. Do that up lightly, get its mate in here, do that up lightly, check the action. That's very smooth. I'll do those screws up snug. That's good. That's tighter. There's a controlled resistance, if you like. It's smooth in its action, but it doesn't flop about. That's exactly what we want. You don't want the aperture settings to be loose, because then they're easily knocked and disturbed, which would lead you to end up with incorrect exposures when you put the camera up to your eye and notice what your fingers were doing. So that's good, that's a good result, and that's the shutter case all dealt with, and that is effectively half of our shutter. And I can start work on this mechanism plate. Well, the mechanism plate, we've got our 5 shutter blades. There's a start and a stop position for these. Your first shutter blade goes on this position. You can see your speed train here. There's a rivet head right here, that's where the first blade goes. The first blade's distinguished by having an extra hole in it. The other blades have 2 holes, this one has 3. So the blades go on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's lift these blades off. I can see they're sticky with oil because they're coming off stuck together. So you could hear that ping as they were lifted off. And the mechanism plate itself, I want to dismantle this. So I've got 1, 2, 3 retaining screws on the back. And they are probably not all the same length. They could be. I'm not sure what will strike. That's a short screw. This could be a long one. It is. That's a short one. So frequently, generally in fact, the screw here close to this end of the speed train is typically a longer one. Take that plate off, take off the blade actuating ring here. On the top of the shutter there's a single screw here. Let's unhook that spring. It's the return spring. Just get that off there. I could tell by the way that lever moved that it's not clean. Let's get that screw loose. Okay, so the mechanism plate I've stripped down as far as I need to strip it down. Typically I do not remove the speed train from the mechanism plate because it's a bugger getting that adjusted correctly. To get the speeds correct, you need to be adjusting the the retard gear train in inwards or outwards at this end and inwards or outwards at that end. Not necessarily at the same time, and it's just awkward. You can get there, but it's half an hour out of your day you would rather not spend at it. So I find it much more convenient to clean all this on the plate. So I'm just going to check and see what that speed train's like. It's quite good. That certainly swings out fairly promptly. I can tell that it's not entirely free from sticky oils, but it's pretty good. And here you can see the grease on the mechanism plate. That yellow stuff is dried grease. Here that's probably not grease. That's probably the from that plastic contact here. And it's some Bakelite plastic or something, I think. Something like that. So this just all has to be cleaned to get all these grease free, and then it can be reassembled. So certain things to watch for. Basically it's just swabbing this with cotton buds and naphtha. Around the speed train, if you push this lever across, it allows this to swing out. As it swings out, there's a coil spring here that becomes visible. If you try and clean it in that position, there's a danger you will catch your cotton bud on that hairspring and make a mess of it. So if you hold the lever at this end out with your finger, swing this arm in, take your finger off, the lever will stay locked in at that position. The spring is wound up out of the way, and you can sweep round there with your naphtha soaked cotton bud without causing any problem. Of course, as soon as you end up at this place, you swing that lever out as you pass by and things will swing back into place. But it's too late. You've gone past and you won't have damaged anything. But all of this yellow grease here is sticky with age. It's gone like a wax. That all needs to be removed. And the same on the undersurface here, though there's very little to see. There'll be some grease on there. It may be graphite grease in this case, but that all needs to come off. It's gone sticky. But there's nothing exciting in this. Now interestingly, there's a rough piece on that metal there. I'm not sure what that's all about. I'm not sure it will cause me any problem, but it's certainly unexpected. I can't get that off. It's like that. It looks to me as if a file has been run over this surface going in this direction, and this is the burr on the far side of that action. I might see if I can scrape that off. It's not interfering with anything, it just shouldn't be there. It's like the part wasn't correctly finished after it was machined. May have been machined with a blunt tool, would have done that, so it's thrown up a burr on the far side. It's white around the inside here, where the lens screws into it. And the outside here, this is where their grease is. Unfortunately, because the grease is all a nice pretty yellow colour, it's easy to spot where it is, and I can see where to apply my attention. This surface in particular needs to be cleaned because otherwise that little lever will not swing freely, and it needs to swing freely. Anywhere you've got broad flat surfaces, broad flat smooth surfaces in particular, if you get any oil or grease on there, they tend to stick things together. The parts do not want to move. A lot of the grease I'm pulling from these components is doing no harm at all because it's tucked down in recesses where nothing actually touches it. So some of this cleaning work is cleaning for its own sake, cleaning for the sake of doing a good job. It's not necessarily going to make a wonderful difference to how the thing works. So I'm fairly happy I've got all the loose grease off that mechanism plate now. But of course I've got the retard gear train here, which is still a little bit suspect. So I'm going to put some naphtha on that and work that repeatedly. Do it again. And this will wash out any dried out oils that have settled in there, and I'll blow that out now. And by blowing away that solvent, you're blowing away the solvent and the oil that it's picked up. If you just leave it to evaporate, it'll leave the oil behind. Not necessarily in exactly the same place as you found it, but it'll be there somewhere. That's moving freer now, that's good. Yeah, that's quite noticeably different. I can tell by the sound, you become familiar with the sound of it. Now I'm just going to wipe that top surface, just because there are a few marks on that. Not that they were doing any harm, that they just don't look pretty. Wipe that bottom surface the same way. That's good. That mechanism plate's ready to put back together. And here's the blade actuating ring. And I'd say that that was graphite grease this has on it, judging by the colour. Basically the medium that the graphite's suspended in is dried up over time and become sticky, so it's not doing the same job it once did. I generally lubricate this component dry, typically with graphite powder. You can lubricate it with graphite from a soft lead pencil. You can use molybdenum paste on it. You could even use graphite grease if you had some, but you use it very sparingly on that component. Certainly don't coat it like some parts you see with shutters where someone applies it like they were buttering their toast and they just stick great gobs of it over every available surface without any consideration as to whether the surfaces involved are actually potentially friction surfaces. And lubricant in the right place is a wonderful thing, but it's not good everywhere. Right, that looks good. Now this little lever this lever's got a little upstand on it at this point. That's where it contacts the flash contact and pushes the moving contact over to the fixed contact. It has a little tiny insulator sleeve on it. If that sleeve was missing, you would find that the flash wouldn't go off quite as you'd expected. Well, that looks quite good. I think I could just about reassemble that now. Yeah, that little rough surface there, I'm just going to be sure that that doesn't touch this. No, it doesn't. That's fine. Okay, next bit. I'll lubricate this with a soft lead pencil. Just wipe around the inside edge, that's where it runs around there. And just run some over the surface here at the top and underneath. And all I'm doing is leaving graphite particles behind, and those graphite particles act as a lubricant. That's all I needed to do. This only goes in one place. This pin here goes through there because it couples to our lever on the top of the mechanism plate. And this is the retainer plate that holds that in place, and I'll do the same for this. The advantage of using a dry lubricant like graphite is that it doesn't attract and hold dust particles like where a grease would do. Okay, so that goes in place. There's a little locating pin there that locates that whole plate, so it only goes on in one position. There's the 3 screws that hold this in position. I know that's a shorty. I'll just do that up lightly. This one's a short one. And this was a long one. When you've got screws of different lengths and different positions, you can always mark the plate with a little mark of some sort so that you know where they go back. Of course, the alternative is to just take lots of photos as you go with your digital camera. Do those 3 screws up snug. Check that all moves freely, of course it does. And here's my lever. Since I'm lubricating things with graphite, let's just do the same for this. It's seated over its post there. Check that it moves freely. It does. Spring back in place. Get it snappy in its action. Of course, as that lever moves, here we go. As that lever moves, it moves the blade actuating ring. So that's good. That mechanism plate's pretty good. I think I might lubricate the retard gear train with a bit of graphite powder. I'll lubricate this retard gear train with a bit of graphite powder, which I've got loose in this container because this is where I'm normally doing it. So I'm going to sprinkle some on there, hold back the pallets and work that action repeatedly. What I'm wanting to do is just work that in on the contact surfaces of those wheels really. And just make sure that they all run over each other smoothly. And with that done, I'll blow away the excess graphite powder because I don't want that coming out later and settling on the lens. So that's working much better than it had previously, and that mechanism plate is ready now for reassembly. But of course I've got to deal with these shutter blades, which are quite oily and certainly need to be cleaned. And I'll clean these in exactly the same way I clean the diaphragm blades, except that they don't have a handy pivot on them for me to hold on the tweezers. So typically I'll be using a toothpick to hold them down while I clean them, taking great care not to put too much pressure on them and damaging the blades. But you've seen that cleaning before, so I'll skip that bit. Well, I've cleaned those blades, so now I'm ready to put the shutter together really. So I'll unhook that spring, swing that arm out to put the blade actuating ring in the blade's open position, and start with blade number 1, which is the one with 3 holes in it. And just fit these blades in position. Now, unlike diaphragm blades, which are certainly interleaved, shutter blades just lie one on top of another. So there is a first and a last position. With diaphragm blades, all blades are equal. Whoops, let's get that back where it came from. Right, all the blades are there, all in position. Now I can put the case in place. So I've got to locate this correctly. There are 3 holes, 2 of them are fairly close together. So I've got to locate the correct position. Those 2 screws will be this one and this one, I believe. Have a look. Does that look right? It looks something like correct. Let's put that over there. Just got to avoid fouling this thing. Lower the case in position. Check that the screw holes line up. They're all centered correctly. And there are 3 screws to hold the case together. Now I'll put the screws in place. Don't do the screws up tight until you've got everything in position and you have checked that the blades move freely. If one of the blades became displaced while you were putting the case over the top, it'll end up getting trapped between the pins it's supposed to rotate around and the case, and you would end up damaging a blade. Interestingly, I saw a case of that very recently. Right, let's see how that goes. Those screws are very lightly done up. I'm just checking those blades swing into place neatly. I'll put a spring on there. Flip this over, do my case screws up snug now. Check that action. That's nice snappy action. That's all running smoothly. No oil on those blades and no stickiness. So that part of the job was a success. Okay, piece by piece I'll put everything back where it came from. So I'll start with my flash contact. There's a couple of grooves either side of this plastic piece where it slides down over the case. So that just pushes on. Sometimes it's tight. Get its retaining screw in place. I'll just make sure that's pushed down firmly before I do that up. I don't want to stress anything and break it. That's good. So as the shutter blades open, this pin will come around, hit that moving blade, press it against the fixed blade at that point and fire the flash. So you can see it makes at just about the point where those blades reach full open. So that's ideal for an electronic flash, of course. If you're using a bulb flash, you'd have to use a slower shutter speed because these flash bulbs take some time to reach peak brilliance. Next, this lever. Now this lever's bent. This is the B lever here. Now this is quite bent at this point, and I don't think it should look like that. I think what's happened there is that someone has forced the setting lever in what can happen is if the shutter is stuck open on B, particularly if the shutter release is stuck down slightly, the shutter won't complete. I think someone's forced the shutter with that set, and that's quite bent. That's running off at quite an acute angle there, so I'm going to straighten that up. That just shouldn't be like that. So I've got to hold this firmly so that the main part of the lever doesn't bend. And twist that piece back to where I believe it came from. Right, that's about halfway. That's a good position to start with. And I'll see how this goes. A wipe of molybdenum paste through the pivot hole. Fit this in place. Find its shoulder screw. And as I mentioned earlier, you need to take pains not to over tighten this screw. If you over tighten it, you'll just end up jamming this lever up and it won't be able to move freely. Yeah, that arm is certainly bent. See if I can square it up a bit here. Yeah, 500th of a second spring, speed spring. I'll just wipe down the centre of that with a bit of molybdenum paste. Very little is required. The return spring likewise needs very little. To get that in there, it's going to be tucked under that 500th of a second spring, seated on its post at this point, and then the spring needs to be tucked down into its groove in the case. Like that. No, not like that. Like that, that's better. The catch that holds the shutter in the cocked position goes here. Now this is not always easy to fit because the hole that the post goes down to is right on the ledge, and so it doesn't want to go down straight down, it wants to go in at an angle sometimes, and if you allow that to happen it won't work right. So take care seating that. Now the spring acts against this lever at this end, so I've got to hook that round behind there. And our shutter release lever goes here. Just looking at the amount of movement on this lever, it looks a little bit much to me. That screw's not tight. That's better. Okay, that's ready for the blade actuating ring now. I'll put a touch of molybdenum paste in a couple of places on here. On the retard gear train on the arm, the edge of that arm, that's where the blade actuating ring runs against it. Around here where this tracks the blade actuating ring and the case, the settings, shutter speed setting cam plate. Here and here. Some in the shutter release lever there, just so that it revolves smoothly on that return spring. And I'd better clean this piece. This is the main lever and it's quite dirty, and that's old yellow grease there, it all needs to come off.